All right, good evening. Welcome to another evening at Egan here at University of Alaska Southeast. My name is Karen Schmidt, and I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, and I also serve as UAS's Vice Provost for Research and Sponsored Programs. So I'm here to welcome you tonight, and also to introduce one of our faculty members who will be tonight's speaker, Dr. Sherry Tamone. Dr. Tamone is a professor of biology in the Department of Natural Sciences in the School of Arts and Sciences and has been on the UAS faculty since 1999. She earned her PhD in endocrinology from the University of California, Davis, and her Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from San Francisco State. Dr. Tamone has conducted research and published widely on commercially important crustaceans in California since 1988 and in Alaska since 1999. Last academic year, Dr. Tamone was awarded a Fulbright Scholar Research Award to support her sabbatical travel to Israel, where she was able to conduct research as a visiting scientist at Ben Gurion University. I'd like to say that becoming a Fulbright Scholar is a significant career accomplishment for any faculty member, and UAS has not had many faculty achieve this distinction. Fulbright Research Awards are extremely competitive, and UAS is very proud of Sherry's achievement in receiving this award to support her international travel and research. Tonight, Sherry will be sharing the many dimensions of her experience as a Fulbright Scholar with her talk entitled, From Alaska to Israel, a Fulbright Scholar's Experience in Culture, Crustaceans, and Climate Change. Changing climate, sorry.
Thank you, Karen. Now, Dr. Karen Schmidt, I believe, is also a Fulbright Scholar. So there's two of us amongst you. And actually three, because there's a PhD student here, Valentina, who is a Fulbright Scholar from Italy, visiting the United States of Alaska. So thanks for coming. I'm really excited to talk about my research and my trip to Israel. It was just really life-changing. I think anytime you have the opportunity to travel to a country, especially with different culture, it's transformative, so you'll learn quite a bit. So like Karen says, I was awarded a Fulbright, and the process is kind of unwieldy. It takes about a year for the process to go from applying with the application to being vetted by not just the United States, but also, in my case, Israel, and then receiving the final notice of award. It took about a year, so I was very happy to be awarded that award. This is a group of Fulbrighters. With the last week, we had dinner with the ambassador from the United States in Israel, David Shapiro, a fancy house north of Tel Aviv. And it's just a great group of people I got to work with. But I'm going to point out some of the people and what they did at the end of my talk. So I thought I'd talk first about a little bit of geography in case you are not familiar with Israel or the Middle East, or where it sits within the Middle East. I'm going to tell you why I chose Israel to study crustaceans. When we all think of Israel as a big desert, where are the crustaceans? I'm going to talk about culture shock, because Israelis are very different from Americans, and we are just as different to them. So culture exchange allows both parties to learn a little bit about each other. Then I'll do a little travel log, so I'll show you some of the fun things I got to do. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Fulbright program. Okay, so there's the Middle East. I think I brought my UAS-sponsored laser here. It's a big region, and this is the edge of Greece. So if you've been to Europe, maybe you're familiar with this region, which I'm not showing on the map, with Italy and France right about here. Turkey, Syria, Lebanon. Israel's right over here. It's this little bit of a country situated between Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. How small is it? Well, I think I couldn't even shrink it down enough. Okay, here's Israel. And there's your home state. And then I found this on the web that kind of puts it in perspective. Israel's tiny, and this is Israel proper. It's not counting all the geography that Israel is occupying right now, which is a Palestinian state of West Bank and also Gaza, although they're not occupying Gaza. So there's Israel, and this is just to give you an overview of where I was and basically what I was doing. I landed in Tel Aviv from Seattle. And this is where Ben Gurion University of the Negev is. It's in Beersheba, which is a desert town. And as my advisor, Amir Sagi, says, it's geographically central. And it is. You can get pretty much anywhere from Beersheba in about 2.5 hours. So you can get down to the resort town of Eilat in 2.5 hours, and you can go up to Haifa in 2.5 hours. You can skirt the West Bank and get up to the Sea of Galilee in about 2.5 hours. So everything is really small there. So that's really just to situate you with the country of Israel. It's got some nice water around it. It's got the Mediterranean Sea, so it's got that Mediterranean climate in the northern regions. And it has the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aqaba. It is one of the forks of the Red Sea, the other fork boundarying the Sinai Peninsula. It's got the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Sea of Galilee. And I was able to swim in each body of water. So, why did I choose Israel? Besides, I knew that I wanted to go dive in the Red Sea. I really had a colleague that I've been working with, have published with in the past, and who's really special to me. His name is Amir Sagi, and when we were graduate students, when I was in my late 20s, we were really fast friends. He was at the University of Santa Barbara, but he did his work in Bodega Marine Lab, and that's where I was pursuing my research on crustacean biology. So we've remained friends, and he's just a wonderful human being. So the opportunity to work with him is something we've discussed. And then he said, why don't you apply for a Fulbright so that I could stay there longer, because it's really difficult. Well, it's hard to travel to a country for just 2 weeks for me and learn very much about it. So the 4 months was really a treat. And anyone who knows me knows I like food. I like culture too, but I like food a lot. So the food in Israel is amazing. So when I got to Beersheba, this was my little apartment unit. Of course, it's only one of those apartment units. It's very modern. It's on the outskirts of the university. And it looks all normal, apartment condo-like, except that this was my study room. It's an office. In every single apartment in Israel that's newly built now, and in every university, there is something called a safe room, all right? So the safe room has gas-proof doors that you shut and bolt. I didn't have pictures of those. But this is the window looking out at another apartment building. And this window here is made out of cement. And so you can pull it shut, and it'll prevent bombs from coming through there. Anyway, I didn't have a chance to use it. But when you live in Beersheba and you hear a siren, you have 60 seconds to get in your safe room and shut that window, okay? So that's just instilling that fear I had when I just landed in Israel, like, what am I doing here with all this mess in the Middle East? But I never got a chance to use that. I pretty much lived in Beersheba. I worked Sunday through Thursday for 4 months. I worked pretty hard on my project, and the bus system shuts down on Friday when the sun goes down for Shabbat, and it doesn't start up again until Saturday evening. So if you didn't get out of Beersheba, which a lot of people did, you were in Beersheba for the weekend. That's what you did. So I worked in the lab quite a bit. Every Friday I went to the market. It was what my lab mates called Shuk Friday for Sherry, because I was one of the few people, except for the grad students, that went to the Shuk and bought all their food there because it was really cheap. And it was really fun for me because we don't have fresh vegetables like that. It was actually quite amazing. So that's Ben Gurion of the Negev in Beersheba. It's quite a large university. It really focuses on biotechnology and high technology. Universities in Israel are well supported by the Israeli state. My friend Amir, he gets 12 months salary, and every single student that he supports is paid for by the university. So his grants, while not gigantic, support all the research that goes on in his lab. He has 8 graduate students, and he has 3 PhD level technicians. So for all of us UAS faculty, can you imagine having 3 PhD level technicians helping you out on your project and not having to fund your salary? And in the summer, we do get funded. We are funded. Anyway, it's a beautiful university. I kind of hung out at this cafe down here, the big library. It's very modern. The work I did with Amir had to do with crustacean endocrinology, and I'm not going to get all sciencey on you. I am just going to tell you generally what I plan to do and what I completed while I was there, and a little bit about what Amir does in his lab. So these are the crustaceans that Amir works on. One of these is a crayfish called Charax quadricarinatus, and this is a big prawn. It's called the red-clawed prawn, and it is called Macrobrachium rosenbergii. And there won't be a quiz. But these are the little crustaceans I work on. One is the snow crab, Chionoecidius opilio, and this is the northern spot prawn we all love dearly, Pendalis platycerus. So what Amir does with his little crustaceans is, and what I was interested in, is he works on sex determination, meaning he works on what factors can, tell a crustacean to become a male or a female. And he was on the forefront of discovering this endocrine gland that's right near the sperm duct of males. And this endocrine gland produces a hormone, and this hormone tells the crustacean to become a male. It makes all the male-type characteristics, whether it's breeding or what it looks like, or sperm ducts, or making sperm. So in the absence of that androgenic gland, the crustaceans that Amir Sagi works on become females. So Amir, who's worked in endocrinology forever, he thought, well, if you can take away that androgenic gland, and not necessarily by surgery, you can make males that are genetically male turn into females that are genetically male. Okay, so if you picture yourself in this room, if early on in your life history someone took out your androgenic gland, you'd look like a female and you'd have all the equipment to be female. Okay, so bear with me here. If you made a male with a male that looks like a female, it has all its offspring are male because they're all genetically male. I probably should have put a slide showing that, but generally when we mate with our mate, we have 50% chance of having a female or a male. Well, in his situation, if you get rid of the androgenic gland, all of the offspring are male. And you haven't made mutants, you haven't altered the DNA, you've just made it stop making a hormone at a very short period of its life. So he got a patent for this and a lot of money to develop aquaculture techniques for this. So what he does with these all-male populations is in aquaculture, he makes broodstock that will then breed with other males and make lots of male offspring. Now that's really good in aquaculture because then all of the offspring are devoting all their energy into making protein, which when you're trying to feed the masses in areas that don't have our Alaskan fisheries out their back door, it's really profitable. So people buy broodstock from Amir's group, and he sells mostly to China and Thailand, and they produce these all-male populations. The other avenue, which I think is kind of interesting, is in conservation biology. He makes all-male populations of crayfish, and he sends them down to Senegal in Africa, and they're just in the trying out phase of this project. But the all-male crayfish eat snails like nobody's business. And the goal of that project is for those crayfish to eat all those snails that are infected with trematodes that cause schistosomiasis. And so in a country which suffers quite a bit from disease, these transgender males are actually really beneficial, so that's their goal there. Now, I'm not planning to do this to tanner crab or to northern spot prawns, okay? So in Alaska, my goal is just to understand the basic biology of male differentiation, and it's important in snow and tanner crab because basically the fishery is a male-only fishery. They only get certain size crab. So if we can understand more about what regulates some of those male characteristics, It's kind of a win-win. We can help with the management of this species. With northern spot prawn, many of you know this, they all start out as male. And then as they get larger and grow, they become females. Okay, it's called a protandric life history. And so we want to understand how the androgenic gland functions during their maturation in the production of this female northern spot prawn. Again, right now, if any of you are shrimpers or for sport or commercial, it's pretty hard times around the Juneau area. And so there's not been a lot of effort into studying the biology of the northern spot shrimp. So I'm really excited to pursue some studies on their biology. So one of my goals for my Fulbright was to learn how to perform histology, which means you take a piece of tissue and you cut it in really thin slices and you stain it, and you can just see a lot about that tissue. You probably remember from biology classes looking under a slide under your microscope and looking at little slides of things. That's histology. So I was able to get my undergraduate who's working in my lab, Esther Bauer, to send me some samples to Israel, and we sectioned them, and this is the androgenic gland of the northern spot prawn. So yay, we found the androgenic gland histologically. But the big deal for us, and this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense to anyone who doesn't work on DNA, is that we sequenced a gene, the entire gene, that codes for the hormone for that hormone that causes maleness. And I'm not going to talk about any more than that. That was a big deal for me, okay? It's not a big deal for you, but it's a big deal for me. And if any of you sequence genes, it's not that easy. I mean, this happened like the last week I was in Israel, and it was party time in the lab. Okay, so I also did some histology on the gonads of a shrimp from the male to the transgender to the female stage, and we definitely saw that they have both testes and ovaries as a male and as a transitional. So it may not be obvious, but this is ovarian tissue and this is testicular tissue. So males make sperm, but they also have an ovary. Transitionals, they're not really making a lot of sperm. They have ovarian tissue, and it's the females that have a whole lot of ovarian tissue making eggs. So I think that's all I'm really going to tell you about what I was meant to do there, and I got a lot done. I didn't get everything done. I'm still working in the lab on sequencing tanner crab, androgenic gland hormone, and then hopefully if I give a research talk sometime, it'll all make sense to those who come to it and me as well. I helped Amir quite a bit on his projects. So what he does with his crayfish and prawns is they don't have a big husbandry setup in their lab. They actually take them out to these aquaculture facilities, and they let their animals grow out in those facilities. So up north in this kind of Sonoma County region, it's very beautiful, called Theyre, they have these grow-out ponds. And this is really for fish. They're big fish ponds that they grow tilapia and a lot of other species that I don't work on fish, so I don't remember them. But he throws all his shrimp and prawns in there, and they just grow, and he doesn't have to deal with them. And at the end of the season, when the fishers come to drain the swamps to get the fish, he has to be there to get the shrimp. And so I'd help him do that. The other part is another aquaculture area is in the Arava Desert, which is another beautiful part of Israel. And you may notice this, but this is Bob walking down the highway. That's my husband. And this is the Arava Desert, and it is phenomenally beautiful and also about 120 degrees. And that's about all I'm going to talk about changing climate, because you know what we're used to. Anyway, in the Arava Desert, they culture all sorts of ornamental fish, including your Finding Nemo fish. Pretty much most aquarium-type fish that you buy may be coming from Israel. They also culture quite a bit of crustaceans. And if you Google Arava Desert aquaculture, you'll just be so impressed with what Israel produces in that small area of the desert. So anyway, I helped the Saji lab transport shrimp. We, count them out, make sure we're putting the correct animals in the right ponds, and then we go out here and we put them in the ponds. Being careful that we know which ponds are holding the crayfish and such. And when we're all done, we go to Faradis, which is an Arabic town right across the road that has the best hummus. So in the Arava Desert, this is what aquaculture looks like. And it's actually really fascinating. They grow everything from all their produce, which, they have agricultural areas up in the north as well. But they grow strawberries, they grow, and you name it, the produce and vegetables is grown in greenhouses. And of course, they have the ornamental fish. And this slide, it's probably hard to see with the lights on, but these are all little clownfish without anemones, so they grow really well without anemones. But this is if you buy a little clownfish, it probably came from Israel. And these are little, they have all sorts of, it's through artificial selection. They make these beautiful fish with red heads, with blue heads, and you go through the aquaculture farm, and it's like a candy store if you're an aquarist. Really interesting. These are generally the setups in there, and they have a lot of airflow. Very interesting. And that's Amir there talking with one of the aquaculturists there. And I put this picture up there because for an hour and a half we broke down on the side of the desert, and it's 120 degrees, and not one of these guys knew how to work the cars, which was surprising to me. And I was on the back saying, check the water. Check the radiator. Then anyway, it took a while, but somebody came down the road and had all this extra water. We didn't have extra water on us. That's like really a dumb thing to do in the Arava Desert, is go down in there without water, because even in about half an hour, it was really hot. Okay, so a little bit about what I learned about Israelis, okay? I was telling a friend the other day that if you Google, why are Israelis so, you don't fill up the blank, arrogant, rude, successful. It's amazing what pops up there. And you can try it with Americans too. Why are Americans so, and I won't tell you what it comes up with. It's not pretty. Anyway, they're not rude. They don't say hi on the street. They don't look you in the eye. I can walk for miles and never say hello to somebody. There's no Gustavus wave. There's nothing until you know somebody, and then they get pretty friendly. So it's one of those cultural things. They're not rude. They just don't say hello. So they think Americans are phony and superficial. And we think we're polite. We say thank you and how are you? And they say, why would you care? Why do you ask? And so I got used to walking down streets and not looking people in the eye and not saying hello, but it was hard. I kind of wanted to say hi every now and then. Sometimes I did, just to confirm that they weren't going to say hi back. And then they have this very different concept of personal space, which is something that comes from living in a very small country. Okay? There's a little lunchroom in the lab, and if it was in America, if two people were in the lunchroom, you'd come in and say, oh, I'll come back, because you didn't want to crowd them out. Well, no joke, 15 people would be in this lunchroom, microwaving, computing, and, come on in. And I'd be, no, I'll come back. Oh, no, they wouldn't have that. Come on in. If you go to the beach, you could be sitting and the whole beach is empty, and they'll come right near you, and you just think, why are you doing that? There's a whole beach there. But this is actually a very crowded beach in Tel Aviv, so it just happens. Here's a lab. My lab office was just like my office in UAS, except there were 8 people in that space. And so even when I was sitting there and someone was there, someone might take their computer and say, can I sit here? And I'd be like, no. But I'd say, oh, of course, yeah, there's plenty of space here. Sit down. So do they have any misconceptions about us? You bet. Okay, besides thinking they were rude. This is what they think Alaska is. It's all about perceptions. They think this is me walking to work. They think everything's frozen. They think bears look like this and that they are around every corner. And when I say I go fishing, this is what they think I'm doing. That's okay, though, because I told them that when I got to Israel, this is what I thought. I thought that they got around by camel and tanks. And actually, these pictures I took, so it's not totally off base. I actually did take those pictures. But you know what I learned is that the soldiers, they're all over the place. They work generally Sunday through Thursday. They're everyone's kids, everyone's in the Army, everyone serves 2 to 3 years. And so after high school, you're committed to the Army for 2 to 3 years. And after you're done with the Army, there's a sigh of relief, and you travel for a year. So by the time you start at the university, you're like 23 years old. And it's a different caliber of student that they all look like graduate students in the undergraduate classrooms. Very interesting. So one of my first trips down, I was invited to give a talk down at the Marine Center down in Eilat. And Eilat is this little tiny body of water here. This is Egypt, Taba, and Aqaba here is Saudi Arabia. So I basically figured you can have breakfast in Egypt, go have a late tea in Eilat, go to Aqaba for a late lunch, and have dinner in Saudi Arabia. And you really could if it wasn't so tough getting through every border. This is the resort in Eilat. This is the other side of where people just camp on the beach, and there's a lot of campers. The Marine Lab is run by the Hebrew University, Technion, Ben Gurion University. All of the universities in Israel have a little place at that Marine Lab, and while it's not really big, there's always a lot going on there. And I gave a talk to quite a big crowd, and it was pretty fun. If any of you know Mike Garvin, he was a PhD student in fisheries here. He's doing a postdoc in Haifa. So I was able to get together with Mike, and he came down for my talk and got to see Eilat together. We went diving, and that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to go see what the Red Sea is like. And that little spit of water is where everyone from Israel goes diving. So you can imagine there's a lot of pressure in that area on the marine life. They have big clams I thought were fascinating. I'm not the best photographer. I didn't have the best camera, but they have a diversity that's really I've never quite seen before in Hawaii, where Hawaii is very pretty, and there's some nice water there, but everywhere you look, there's a very different coral and tons of fish. I changed my GoPro. That worked out better than my camera, but it was the last day. Anyway, if you came for Red Sea diving pictures, that's it. Okay, you feel really safe because Israeli boats are they have these gun shells here. They go up and down the coast from Taba over to Saudi Arabia. So, there's always this presence. And yet, the Israeli people always seem so lighthearted. And I don't know, I kept looking to see planes overhead, and they're all used to that. I put this slide up here because one of my first days, I was able to travel from Ben Gurion University all the way up north. This is Haifa. Tel Aviv is down here. But I wanted to bring up this area that a lot of Americans, whether you agree or not, Israel's occupying some geography that's not theirs. All right, so Golan Heights here is actually part of Syria, and this little red line is this area that they've agreed to keep like a boundary. All right, but Golan Heights is really, Israel they don't dispute it. They think it's theirs to have, but they are occupying this area. And you really don't understand that until you go visit that area, and I kind of see their point, because when you travel up here, this is some beautiful, it looks like Sonoma County. Off in the distance, let's see, it's pretty light, it's hard to see. This is Lebanon, so you can just look over the hill, and there's Lebanon. And this is Golan Heights region. So right over there is Syria. And so this is a big ridge that strategically has been used over the past in the Six-Day War. And it's something that Israel is very fearful of Syria taking over. This is not a great picture, but I thought it was kind of interesting because there's this sign here, which you can't read because it's not in focus, says, "Do not cross, this area is full of landmines." Okay, and so there is about 4 kids that were playing about in 2011 that got blown up by landmines. And so they now have signage, but not the cows. Cows are free to roam, and maybe that's their way of finding the landmines. So again, there's always these little hints that everything's not perfect in the world. On the other hand, there's some phenomenal biology up north in Israel, and this is the Hulu Valley crane migration that occurs every year, and there's like thousands and thousands of birds that come through from Africa, and they go up north of the Sea of Galilee. It's so fertile, and there's lots of, nowadays, lots of water up there. And right behind you that's the Golan Heights. So again, this area is about 40% occupied by the Israelis. The Sea of Galilee, if you have a good read on the Bible, there's a lot of history here. In fact, Capernaum is said to be where Jesus was a minister, and this area just has so much history that if you are a historian, you should definitely go up there. It's just amazing. Okay, I'm going to change gears because what was most interesting to me in Israel was that I got to live on a kibbutz. I got to live on a kibbutz that was one of the technicians in the lab. Her name was Rivka. She's lived there. She was born there, okay? Her mother's there. They've lived there since 1946. Their family's been there. And if you don't know what a kibbutz is, a kibbutz, even before Israel gained independence, people lived in kibbutzim, which were kind of like communistic communes. And they also lived in mushav. And a mushav was just like a communal farms where everyone farmed and gave part, but they made their own money and they spent their own money. And a kibbutz, what they do is they put everything into the kibbutz. So if you are Rivka and you work in Mirsaji's lab and you make a salary, her whole salary gets turned over to the kibbutz. There's a printing factory there, and all the money from the printing factory gets turned over to the kibbutz. And so if you live at the kibbutz, you get your own house, you get your own food, 3 meals square a day at the cafeteria. You can go to a store that doesn't have any money. You just go and grab stuff. And I asked, does anyone steal anything? And no, there's no reason because it's all yours, right? Someone does your laundry for you. Someone does the gardening for you. Okay, and this area in Kibbutz Be'eri, if you can see Gaza here, Be'eri is right there, okay? So it's about a mile off the Gaza Strip. Anyway, it's very idyllic. You almost feel like I couldn't figure out for me what was wrong because everyone was happy. They let their kids play till like 10 p.m. Go get the kids. They're all on the quad. They have their own zoo with little hatching tanks and lemurs and turtles. And they have festivities all the time. This is Rivka and her husband Erez. Erez runs a bicycle shop outside of the kibbutz that makes money, and all that money goes to the kibbutz. So he works really hard because he loves biking. I think I have a picture of this place because this is the laundry room where you go in and you go pick up all your clothes that has been washed. She hasn't done laundry ever. I'm like, whoa, that's hard to believe. She does sometimes cook in her house, but generally, she has a meal. She brought all this stuff to work that looked just like good, healthy kibbutz food. This is the bike store. It's called Levat Amesh. And on any given Saturday, 200 people come there and rent bicycles. And the reason they rent bicycles is because there's so much single track. There must be hundreds and hundreds of miles of single track trails. And people come from all over Israel, especially in the February and March, because the wildflowers are just spectacular. But this is Erez. He took me all over the place, and that's Gaza right there. And that's where, if you go through some of these forests right over along here, they're burned out. You can still see bombs, holes in the ground from last summer. Anyway, the beautiful wildflowers against this World War I London kind of bunkers, London British bunkers from World War I times. So it's actually very historical lands. Again, very beautiful, rolling hills, and yet there's Gaza, where people are suffering, and there's a ton of oppression, and it's just so, again, hard to separate my feelings about Israel and how they work their politics. This is a really cute little building. It's a bomb shelter for kids. It's painted really nice. You've got the marine theme, which I like. But kids, if you hear the siren in Be'eri, you have less than 15 seconds to get to a shelter or a safe room. And again, I didn't hear a siren while I was there, but the year before, there were 2 kids from a kibbutz nearby that didn't quite make the shelter. So, a reality check. So, that kibbutz was very interesting. I stayed with her. I was only going to spend the night, but I ended up staying 4 nights with her over a holiday. And then when Bob came to visit me in Israel, we went back to the kibbutz, and it was probably one of our most interesting. It's just such an interesting concept. This is another kibbutz. It's a big botanical garden in the Dead Sea called a Kibbutz Ein Gedi. and there's all sorts of natural springs around there, so it's not, you wonder where Israel gets their water. And again, that's a fascinating story there. They recycle every drop of water they have. Every piece of water that goes down your drain is recycled somewhere and comes back, okay? California has started trying to figure out from Israel how they recycle their water, because obviously California is having some needs for water reclamation. Anyway, this was a beautiful kibbutz, and it was a commercial kibbutz, meaning that they get their revenue from tourism. So it wasn't cheap to stay there. It was very close to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea was actually, from a biologist's point of view, very interesting. It's 10 times more salty than the marine environment. So if you go in the water, you can float really easy. And all the pictures you've ever seen, it's just like that. It's actually really cool. It's not super crowded these days. Tourism has taken a big hit over the last 6 years. There's still a lot of German tourists that come down and European tourists, but I didn't ever see any American tourists. Anyway, it looked like our glacial ice, but it's just a big salt block. And this is a sign that signifies how much water has left the Dead Sea region. Okay, the Dead Sea used to come up to this shore. It's kind of like our glaciers, kind of moving farther and farther away. Well, now the Dead Sea has it hasn't really moved far away. It's evaporating, okay? The source of the Dead Sea is the Jordan River, and it leaves and it evaporates. There's nowhere else for it to go because, as you know, does anyone know how low the Dead Sea is? It's like 1,200 feet below the sea level. So it is the lowest point on Earth, so I felt really excited to go there too. I mean, you can really feel it. The air's pretty heavy. Anyway, I didn't really see any danger of drowning right there. All right, when you're in the Dead Sea region, which is kind of south and east, you can go visit Masada, which is a phenomenal historic site. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was built by slaves in like 30 BCE, before the Common Era, and it was ordered by King Herod, who is called the Great, but I sure wouldn't have liked to work with him. Anyway, he chose this place, which is perched on top of this 1,800-foot cliff. This is obviously just a model, but it's this 3-tiered with bathhouse, very ornate, and he felt very protected there because you really couldn't get at the palace from any side very easily. Sometime, I can't remember the dates, I don't always know my history, but sometime just maybe 70 AD, there was the last remnants of Jewish culture that took over this deserted palace area and basically held up in there to protect themselves from the Roman Empire that was causing a lot of havoc on their civilization as well. And they were able to stay up there for years, but eventually the Romans built a ramp along the back side out of dirt, and were able to get up there and take over the residual folks that were there. So this is some of the the other interesting thing about Masada is it sat there empty for 1,300 years. No one ever really discovered it until, I couldn't believe this, 1960 is when somebody actually went up and saw these remnants, and since then it's become a big archaeological site, and they're doing as much restoration as they can. But this is what's left after 1,300 years. There's quite a few mosaics, and it's really quite beautiful. This is the backside toward the west, and you can see this is the ramp that was built. When you look over, this is the ramp that was built by the Romans, and they brought up their catapults and took over Masada. Anyway, if you do go there, you should wake up at like 3 in the morning and hike up and watch the sunrise from Masada. We got up at like 5:30, so this is not from the top. We got halfway, but I still took a picture. Anyway, there's this tremendous amount of great food in Israel, and I'm not going to tell. I mean, I actually explored so much of Israel. I'm just going to show some of the pictures from Jerusalem, which is a pretty hot spot right now. So a lot of the conflicts between the Palestinians and the Israelis are occurring primarily in Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, in which there's a lot of indecision about who owns what. And that's really putting it simply. So the ultra-Orthodox Jews would like more access to what's called the Temple Mount here, and of course the Arabs would, that's their place of worship. So they really would like to limit the Jews' access to this area. Old history, and it's just a beautiful old city. And there's a wall that you might be familiar with called the Western Wall. It's actually the lower part of it, going down about 40 feet, is the remnants from like thousands of years old. And so this Jerusalem's been destroyed multiple times, but this is called the Western Wall, and it's the most intact remaining part of the old city of Jerusalem. And it's where a lot of the ultra-Orthodox Jews, as well as conventional Jews, will come and pray. So you'll notice this wall here separates the women from the men. So if you do show up there, don't just go willy-nilly on either side. There's definitely some order there. Okay, and what people do at the wall is you can go to the wall and stick notes. These are your prayers that are just between you and God. You would put those prayers into the wall. And about every week, a rabbi comes through, collects all those prayers, puts them in a bag, and buries them up in the Mount Olives. Okay, so that was really interesting for me to watch, and I felt like I was embarking a little bit on everyone's privacy here, but there were quite a bit of tourists. This is a Jewish graveyard, and it costs quite a bit to have yourself interned in one of these because it's as close to the old city as you can get. Okay, and when the resurrection occurs, they're going to be the first ones to be able to go through those gates. So it's kind of interesting. All right, the last pictures I wanted to show you were from Jordan, because I was able to go to Petra, and if you have any desire to know geology, it's a phenomenally interesting place. But again, it's old, 2,000 years old, and it's carved into the mountains of the Jordanian hills. And it was used during the spice route, so it was a very fancy town in its time. But when boats took over and no longer used that spice route, Petra went into kind of disarray. The only people using it were the Bedouins, and they just camped out in there. Well, it wasn't until, I know I'm going to mess this date up, but it might have been like 1946 or 1966 that a Scottish guy, discovered Petra. I mean, it's not like Petra wasn't there, but he actually was able to find his way into this really amazing place, and it's now one of the 7 wonders, unnatural wonders of the world. Anyway, it's all carved in the rocks, and there's so much geology involved and plate movements, and you walk through what's called a Sikh. It's a big cavernous canyon with the most amazing colors, and then you come around this one corner and you start seeing this carved out amazing city. And you never even, that's all I have of that actually. You never really get to see the entire city of Petra because it's really enormous. So where the tourists go and you can spend a whole 2 days there hiking, you barely touch the entire city. There's crazy Bedouins running off with their camels. There's not a lot of tourism. They're always wanting you to ride their camel, but if you're not going to ride their camel, they're going to gallop as fast as they can through these really narrow areas, and you're just always jumping off the side. This is some of the stairs that wind all the way up to what's called the Monastery, but you just have to go there to see this. Even pictures don't do it justice. It's just so gigantic. So only the Bedouins in Petra are allowed to sell things, market their wares, and you will see a lot of children selling these rocks that are, I don't know where they got them, probably, on the ground. Hopefully they're not taking apart some big tomb area. I got a large rock that is in my living room, and my daughter Molly said, "Did you take the ear off a lion or something? Because it looks just like an ear." So yeah, that's me. I just chiseled that right off a lion and brought it home. Anyway, going through the borders is not that pleasant, but it's not impossible. You know, it just takes a long time, and you have to show your passport a lot of times, and then you have to walk long distances, so it's pretty interesting. It's actually harder going back to Israel than it was to go into Jordan. In fact, traveling to Israel always takes a lot longer because even at any airport, you have to go through a second stage of security before they'll let you on the planes. So anyway, that's my little travelogue. Just barely touched what I got to experience in Israel. It was really quite tremendous. So the last thing I wanted to tell you is just a little bit about the Fulbright program because, everyone, says, wow, how'd you get a Fulbright? And, you just apply. I don't think you have to be a genius. Maybe you do. I don't know. You apply, you have a good plan, and you don't have to be a scientist, all right? You can be an undergraduate. You can just have graduated from UAS. You can look at the application page. It's like October those applications are due. But it's such a great program, and really this was legislated. This is a very young picture of Senator J. William Fulbright from Arkansas, but he kind of had this vision of people traveling the world, and as you know, once you travel to a place and interact with the people, you have a better understanding of the people, and Israelis aren't rude. They just don't say hello and thank you, all right? So there's been, I don't know, a million, maybe hundreds of thousands of people have received a Fulbright to study in Africa and Israel and the Middle East. There are many countries that aren't supported by the Fulbright program. But they have these regions, and if you're interested at all, even if you don't have a degree, you can apply for a Fulbright. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides of a really interesting woman from San Francisco who taught ballet up in Mill Valley and San Rafael, and she received a Fulbright to to dance between Palestine and Israel, and she brought her dance troops all around the West Bank and Israel. But whatever region you're interested in, you should look at the actual descriptions. So for Middle East and North Africa, there's some, you go to Morocco. I met some really interesting people going to do some really interesting projects. And they all have their own rules. So like for Israel, I had to not only have a letter from Israel, but Israel had to put up $2,000 to support whatever I was planning to do. And so that came from BGU. They supported me to that extent. So again, just if you're a recent graduate, if you're a master's or postdoctoral, Valentina is a graduate student. There she is. Why don't you stand up? She's from Italy. And she's in the fisheries program, and a Fulbright is supporting her travels here. So if you run into Valentina sometime and want to talk to her about that, she would probably love to talk to you about it. It's not just science. It's writers, it's humanities, it's people who have sustainable interests in water. It's NASA scientists, it's journalists, it's ballet dancers, and it's historians. This is our little motley group. This is Judy, who kept us all under wraps and made sure that we were, culturally connected, because I didn't have any problems, but there were a number of people who did get more homesick or had trouble with the cultural differences. This woman here, Lynn Feldman, if you want to look her up, she's a graphic designer who tries to integrate like evolutionary thought into art. And so she does a lot of web pages for schools, and she did a beautiful film for Ben Gurion University. This is Casey Leethorne. This is the greatest gal I've met, just really an amazing personality. And even when she walked, she danced everywhere. But her project, if you look on her blog and her webpage, she got little kids dancing, and she worked with movements in the West Bank with older Palestinians. And, people want to get along. Most people want to get along. And there's definitely some struggles there, but I think she made some good progress. This is Alison Hartman. She's an oceanographer, and she invited me to a lot, but she's doing some really nifty work in the Red Sea, looking at actually paleobiology and looking at the cores and doing, I actually didn't really understand everything. She's really smart. Anyway, I can't thank this lab enough. I mean, I almost get weepy looking at this group because they made my life so great in Israel. They didn't let me miss one of their holidays, including Purim, which is where it's like Halloween, you dress up and everyone throws chalk at everybody. And then my crustacean friends here, he's a conservation biologist, and this is Omri. Anyway, a great group of people to work with, and I don't know if you noticed that t-shirt, but he loved his gift. So I'd like to thank them, and they're not here, but also UAS, because UAS supported my sabbatical for the 9 months I was over there as well. And I'm able to take all this work and come back to my lab and work with my students here now. So thanks very much. And I'll take any questions you have about Israel or about crustacean endocrinology.
No questions tonight?
Kim?
I had the good fortune of spending some time in Israel in 1986, and when I interacted with the State Department and the embassy, particularly with Jordanian and Syrian graduate students, they were all over me as an American to try to get to the United States and to integrate with the Israelis, particularly when I was in Jerusalem. Did you have any interaction with Jordanian graduate students or academics who really wanted to be more integrated with the Israelis, or have times changed?
I think Jordan is a friend to Israel, and they definitely have students that like to go to the U.S. and study. They have really great university at Amman that they'd like the Israelis to come to, but they're kind of divided. And the Jordanian, one of the projects that they wanted to share was an airport down near Eilat, because the Eilat airport is very small to support that. So they wanted to get a joint airport, which Jordan is building, and Israel said no. So now they're making 2 airports, which is really frustrating for the Jordanian people. Yeah, I think economically Jordan is definitely hurting now. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, with the slideshow. Yeah, the markets were great. I posted some things on my blog, but the fruit and vegetables are so small. Like a cucumber is small. It's good. All this stuff tastes so rich and good, and it's not ginormous. You know, strawberries are small and sweet. The food is besides just using fresh vegetables. You know, I learned how to make hummus. I learned how to make real tahini, and they love to cook. So Thursdays is the day before Shabbat. Friday, they always make a gigantic dinner, and I was invited to probably 14, well, I was only there 10 weeks. No, I was there a long time. A lot of dinners, and they like to make Moroccan. Well, I don't know if you know this about Israel, they're immigrants themselves, obviously, right? So they come from Morocco, they come from Libya, they come from Ethiopia, and so all of these foods, these cuisines get mixed, and so the flavors are just really, the spices that you can buy there are just great.
Do you think the cost of living was comparable to here, or was it cheaper?
The cost of living is awful. So people can't, the youngsters really have a hard time buying a house. So I'd say we went through the elections with Netanyahu being reelected, and I would say, hands down, the young people were not voting for Netanyahu because they were feeling that the economy was hurting under his watch. So yeah, it's one of the biggest complaints one heard from graduate students is that it's very difficult to get a place. Now if you eat meat, I eat mostly fruits and vegetables. It was pretty low on the food chain and it wasn't expensive, but I think if you went for lamb and a lot of others, or beer, alcohol is kind of expensive, and people don't drink. I did not notice people drinking that much there. I mean, you could go to someone's house, and you know how in America it's the first thing out of someone's mouth, what can I get you? Well, I would go to someone's house, and they'd lead me to the living room, and I'd be saying, why doesn't anyone ask me if I want a beer or something? But it's not in their culture. Rich?
Hold on.
Your experience talking about the cost of living and not having housing and stuff, is that making any change in the idea of going back to the kibbutzim idea, or is that sort of outmoded, or how does that fit into the whole economy of Israel?
The kibbutzim is outdated. There's only few that are profitable, and Be'eri is one of those. Most of them haven't been able to bring in the income. A lot of the youngsters are leaving the kibbutz because they don't want to stay around their family forever and then raise their family. But so it is going away. Some of the kibbutz have changed their way, so it's not so communistic in that you can earn money and keep some of it. And so that appeals to some people, but you'll see most of the kibbutzim have some kind of commercial aspect like lodging. So if you go to Israel, it's a really good way to get around Israel, to stay on a kibbutz. And they're usually quite beautiful, really botanical gardens all through them. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say thank you for showing this awesome presentation. My question for you is, like, what was your interpretation of the coral reefs out there, since it's a hot topic?
So the coral reefs are definitely impacted because the reefs are so close to shore. You do not need a boat to go to any of the reefs. There are some off the Sinai that use boat dives to get to them. On the other hand, to scuba dive in Israel requires you to go with a guide. And I didn't have to go to a guide because I had an assistant instructor from 1990 expired, but they still thought that was great. So, if you have some high training, you can get around the guide thing. But the guide makes sure all your gear is tucked in everywhere so your regulator's not hitting the coral. And they definitely keep people away from the coral. But, there's broken coral. It's an interesting landscape because it's all sandy with big outcroppings. And so you can spend an entire dive around an outcropping that's about as big as this side of the chair. This area would be one, with caves and all sorts of things. Quite beautiful.
Was the area in Syria that was
The Golan Heights.
yes, that the people were moving over from Israel, was that all refugee camps? Or?
When people say they have settlements, right? So there are settlements all through the Golan Heights. There are settlements, Israeli settlements, all through the West Bank. There are no settlements in Gaza. But again, my impression of what a settlement was a refugee camp. And you go there, and some of the fanciest condominiums are those settlements. And so again, a lot of the Israelis are not happy with the push towards increasing settlements in the West Bank. They know that's not moving towards a peaceful solution. And yet, under Netanyahu, that is one of their big emphases, is to establish this geography as Israel's. So, I've been reading more about it, but there probably was a time where a two-state solution could have been useful. It could have worked. But now, the West Bank, no matter how small it is, by having a two-state solution, they are agreeing that Israel is its own state, and they really want that land back. So I don't see any any love between those two for a long time. And they don't want to make a one-state solution, which is basically how it was under British rule, because the population of Arabs is definitely outnumbers the population of the Jewish population. So the first election, anything that the Jews have fighted for will be kind of wiped out. There's a lot of fear, and so it's hard to know if you're Israeli which way to go. My friends all say, they shouldn't do the settlements, but yep. It's complicated. Go ahead.
All right, could you speak to the productivity of the other water bodies there? I've been to the Mediterranean, and parts that I've been to have been pretty dead, and yet I see pictures with all that fish in the marketplace. And so did that come from the Sea of Galilee or the
Mm-hmm.
Dead Sea or Mediterranean?
From the Mediterranean Sea and aquaculture, but Mediterranean Sea primarily. The Red Sea is a big tropical, boy, I don't know, Tom, I don't think the tropical Red Sea is there is fishing there, but most of the fishermen are off in the Mediterranean Sea. The Sea of Galilee, I saw local fishers there, but nothing commercial. And again, its water levels are dropping. They have one new initiative right now, which, I mean, from a conservation biologist point of view, it just doesn't sound good. But because the Dead Sea is so low, and the Sea of Galilee is not, the Jordan River is being diverted, so it's not getting the water that the Dead Sea needs. I don't know for what, nothing lives in the Dead Sea, but they're making an aqueduct between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea, and because we're 1,200 feet deep lower, water is going to flow from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea to fill it up. Doesn't sound right to me. Well, thanks very much. Go enjoy that really nice evening out there.